I grew up in Canada, where the entire trade mechanism is built toward trading with the United States. Canada is actively seeking to diversify its own trade relations. It's currently trying to finalize a free trade deal with a bloc of South Asian countries.
When President Trump talks trade, he talks about strength, about using tariffs to bring countries to the table. But as the summer of 2025 unfolds, something unusual is happening. The table is getting emptier. Yes, the talks are technically still on. Canada is negotiating. The EU hasn't walked away. Mexico is sending messages. But make no mistake, behind the press briefings and formal letters, America's closest allies are pulling back. And in the process, Trump's tariff strategy is not just straining relationships abroad. It's also hitting the U.S. economy at home. Hard.
This is America's biggest trading partner. Other countries are doing similar things. They're trying to figure out how to be less reliant on a trading partner that is unreliable and unpredictable.
After months of stalled dialogue, Trump's new round of tariff letters landed with a thud. 35% duties on Canadian goods, 30% on EU and Mexican exports, and 50% on copper, pharmaceuticals, and other sensitive items. The backlash was strategic. Canada accelerated deals with South Asia. The EU delayed its countermeasures but drafted a massive $72 billion retaliation list. Mexico continued talks but with reduced optimism. None of these countries slammed the door, but none are treating the US as a reliable partner anymore. Instead, they're working on long-term alternatives, and America is no longer in the center of their plans.
Past 3 months, this is when the tariffs went into place and companies either decided to absorb some of that, get inventory ahead of that deadline, or start to pass some of that on to the consumers.
While allies quietly pulled back, the real pain began showing up inside the U.S. economy. The 50% tariff on copper raised immediate concerns. The U.S. imports over half of its refined copper from allies like Canada, Peru, and Chile. But domestic refining capacity is limited. Tariffs only raised the cost, without improving supply. It was the same story with Brazilian coffee. With a 50% duty in place, prices spiked. But coffee isn't produced at scale in the US, except in Hawaii. Importing alternatives simply isn't feasible. American consumers bore the cost, with no gain in strategic security. Meanwhile, US companies and financial institutions began closely tracking the fallout. According to CBS News reporting, many businesses either tried to absorb the new costs, front-load inventory, or passed prices on to consumers. Attention also turned to household spending. Banks were watching whether American consumers, already stretched by inflation, were cutting back or falling behind on payments. Another area under scrutiny was investment. IPO activity and corporate mergers began to stall, driven by rising input costs and trade uncertainty. These developments raised questions not just about current earnings, but about confidence in the economy's direction. And as President Trump continued to publicly pressure the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates, especially around real estate, analysts noted that the White House was now seeking monetary relief to offset disruptions that its own trade decisions had helped create. Beyond immediate inflation and investment drag, a deeper shift is underway. The EU has signaled that its next wave of retaliation may target U.S. services, intellectual property, digital platforms, financial products. These are areas where the U.S. traditionally runs a surplus. If that surplus erodes, the U.S. loses not just income, but influence. Meanwhile, Canada is reviewing export permits for strategic minerals, including rare earths, copper, and uranium. Limiting exports to the U.S. would disrupt supply chains for EVs, AI chips, and clean tech manufacturing. According to projections from the IMF in June, a full trade breakdown with Canada and the EU could reduce U.S. GDP by up to 0.4%, with long-term investment loss in advanced sectors. What's emerging is not just a trade dispute, it's a structural split in the global economy, with the U.S. drifting to the sidelines.
Well, I think that's the key question, is what deal will be credible, will be sustainable, given the extreme uncertainty that's coming out of the Trump White House.
President Trump has argued that tough tariffs show strength. But what they've shown instead is isolation. While allies build new partnerships, the U.S. faces rising costs, anxious markets, and a weakening position in global trade. In the end, it's not just about how high the tariffs go, it's about how much trust is left when the dust settles. And right now, America's trading partners are quietly rebuilding a world that doesn't rely on Washington.
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says a proposal for a new oil pipeline in Canada is highly likely.
Look, the bottom line is a new east-west coast pipeline in Canada is good for Canadians. It's good for world markets in that we have access to more supply.
But for the first time, Canadian liquefied natural gas is heading overseas.
As President Trump ramps up tariffs against Canada, Ottawa is responding, not with speeches or countermeasures, but with something far more strategic. For the first time, Canadian liquefied natural gas is being shipped directly to Asia, bypassing the United States entirely. At the same time, a new cross-country pipeline is being fast-tracked. It's not retaliation, it's leverage, and it could reshape the balance of power in North America's energy and trade relationship. In early July, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney confirmed what many had suspected. Canada is moving ahead with a proposed pipeline connecting Alberta's oil fields to the Pacific coast. This east-west pipeline would allow Canadian oil to bypass American refineries entirely, a strategic shift at a time when U.S. tariffs are rising. According to former U.S. Energy Secretary Dan Brouillette, Canada's push is more than economic. It's political. With American refiners buying most of Canada's oil, the country has long been boxed in. This pipeline could change that. But oil isn't the only focus. In British Columbia, LNG Canada has now shipped its first cargo of liquefied natural gas to North Asia. The $40 billion project, the largest private investment in Canadian history, has capacity for 14 million tons annually, and it could double. Suddenly, Canada is no longer just exporting energy to the United States. It's entering the global market.
Well, as you know, it addresses two key priorities for the Carney government. One, trade diversification, which is the new mantra in response to Trump's tariffs. So it fits into that. It also fits into the other objective of Canada becoming an energy superpower.
Why does this matter now? Because nearly 97% of Canada's oil and gas exports still go to the U.S. That's been a long-standing vulnerability. It means lower prices, less production, and no access to rising demand overseas. But LNG is shifting that. Asia now accounts for over 70% of global LNG demand. Countries like Japan, South Korea, and China are looking to cut coal use and need reliable natural gas. Canada, with its Pacific coastline, has a key advantage. A tanker from British Columbia reaches Asia in half the time it takes from the U.S. Gulf Coast. That means Canada can compete and win. If this shift continues, Canada could significantly reduce its reliance on American buyers. And in a trade negotiation, that matters. It changes the power dynamic. Because if Trump continues to use tariffs as pressure, Canada now has an option. Redirect supply away from the U.S., not just in theory, but in real volume. This is no longer a bluff. It's infrastructure in motion.
North Asia, the project comes as Canada looks to diversify its trading relationships outside of the U.S.
The United States might be the world's top oil producer with a record 13.4 million barrels per day in July 2025, according to the Energy Information Administration. But production is only one part of the equation. Delivery is another. America still faces challenges building the pipeline capacity needed to move that oil. It also relies heavily on stable imports from Canada to balance refining needs, especially in the Midwest and Northeast. If Canada cuts or diverts supply, U.S. refiners could face higher costs. Consumers could see higher fuel prices. Even more, industries tied to energy, like electric vehicles, heavy manufacturing, and construction, could feel the pressure. Canada's new LNG routes, if fully scaled, could also undercut future U.S. export ambitions. While the Trump administration promotes its own Alaska LNG project, it's years behind. By the time American gas reaches Asia, Canadian cargo may already be there. Trump's tariffs were meant to corner Canada, but they may have pushed it to finally break free. Pipelines and LNG terminals don't respond to tweets. they reshape long-term leverage. And this time, it's Canada laying down the infrastructure, not just the rhetoric. As natural gas flows westward and oil bypasses old routes, the question isn't whether Trump will escalate. It's whether the U.S. is ready for a trade war where energy is the counterpunch.
So many issues involve U.S.-Canada relationships that it's like shooting your sibling in the heart. I can't believe we're doing what we're doing.
Tariffs are tools. But in today's trade war, they've become something more. Symbols of disruption, wielded personally by Donald Trump. This latest escalation didn't come from Beijing or Brasilia. It came from Washington. And it wasn't aimed at rivals, but at Canada. For decades, the United States and Canada weren't just trading partners. They were collaborators in manufacturing, in defense, in shaping the global economy. Now, that foundation is cracking. And for the first time, the pushback is coming not just from Ottawa, but from Washington insiders themselves. Carla Hills, who once led America's NAFTA negotiations, is sounding the alarm. Not with politics, but with history. Because what's happening now isn't just a trade dispute. It's a breakdown, triggered by Trump, but felt across borders.
You make of Trump issuing this tariff threat in the middle of trade talks? Things look to be going in the right direction. It seems like there was some positive signals being sent. Now he's just dumped this on us.
Trump's tariff-first approach has left allies scrambling. And among those most concerned are the very people who once helped build the North American trading system. Carla Hills, former U.S. trade representative, isn't known for dramatic language, but even she has called the situation a self-inflicted wound, comparing it to turning on your own sibling. For her, the damage isn't abstract, it's operational. Cross-border supply chains, especially in autos and manufacturing, rely on predictability. Trump's surprise escalations are replacing that with chaos. Planning has become guesswork. From small businesses in Michigan to parts manufacturers in Ontario, firms are holding back on hiring, investing, and signing long-term contracts. And the economic toll is measurable. A Yale study in July 2025 projected the disruption could cut Canada's GDP by 2.1% and cost American households over $2,500 annually due to inflation. Trump promised control. What businesses got was confusion.
What I wanted to emphasize today is, as Minister in charge of industries and of the economy, is we are not alone in this world. We need to be closer to our allies.
Instead of reacting emotionally, Canada is shifting strategically and sending a message that it won't wait for Trump's mood to change. Just weeks before the latest escalation, Prime Minister Carney signed a new agreement with the European Union. More than a trade deal, it includes coordination on industrial policy, defense, and strategic industries. This wasn't a press stunt, it was a pivot. And while Carney keeps negotiations private, Industry Minister Melanie Joly has taken the lead in economic diplomacy. Her approach is quiet but pointed. Canada is protecting jobs not through retaliation, but through realignment. Under CETA, trade with the EU continues to expand. And Joly is working to accelerate full ratification across Europe, even as 10 member states have yet to finalize the agreement. Her message is simple. Trump may be closing doors, but Canada is opening others. The longer Trump leans into unpredictability, the more Canada leans out. What began as a dispute is fast becoming a divorce. Ottawa is meeting with Berlin, Brussels, and Paris, building alternative supply chains and co-investment pathways that exclude the U.S. And the U.S. isn't just losing trade, it's losing credibility. Veteran negotiators like Hills have warned that leadership is about consistency, but Trump's tariff policy has been anything but. And with each new escalation, that inconsistency drives partners further away. Canada isn't just adjusting, it's repositioning structurally and strategically for a post-Trump economic landscape. Trade is more than numbers, it's trust. And once that trust is broken, through chaos, threats, or shifting rules, rebuilding it isn't simple. Trump may see tariffs as leverage, but his former allies now see them as warnings. Canada is adapting, Europe is welcoming. And if this trend holds, Trump's greatest legacy may not be manufacturing revival, but the fragmentation of a continent-spanning alliance.